has time to sleep. He does so many things. So he is going to talk to you today about threats to freedom around the world. Please join me in welcoming Matthew Elliott.
Thank you, Myron. It's a pleasure to be here today. My second Defending the Dream Summit, so it's great to be back. I wanted to talk about 7 threats to freedom as I see them, certainly as we face them from the UK. But I think there's a lot of follow-through to what goes on in the US as well. I think you face similar threats from my understanding of the situation over here. I think the first threat has to be high-spending governments. And as Myron said, we deal in taxpayers' issues at the Taxpayers Alliance and have looked very specifically at how spending has worked in the UK. And just to give you a few statistics, government spending in the UK is now 52% of GDP. So over half of GDP in the UK is now spent by the government, thanks to our last Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. Though thankfully our new Prime Minister, David Cameron, is trying to do something about it. I'll talk more about that later. And as a result of that, of course, you can't raise 52% through taxation. So £1 in every £4 spent by the government is through borrowing, through the deficit. And we face a huge fiscal crisis in the UK. I know you've got a fiscal crisis here, but since we're not a reserve currency, since the pound's not a reserve currency, the situation's perhaps even worse in the UK than it is here. And this overspending that's gone on has been hugely wasteful. One of the things we've done at the Taxpayers Alliance, have you heard of the MP's expenses scandal from last year? You may have heard about the moats and all these sort of things which MPs were using their expenses to buy and pay for. We were at the forefront of that, of exposing that waste through the Freedom of Information Act. And each year we put down literally tens of thousands of freedom of information requests to find out how taxpayers' money is being used in the UK. I came back from a trip recently, and my research team at the TPA were massively excited because they'd uncovered a new example of waste. And what we were looking into was how money was being spent on there's a cultural programme where basically the government gave money to disadvantaged people to pay for them to take part in cultural activities. And looking at all the spending, there were lots of things like visits to museums and theatres and art galleries and that sort of thing. But then there was also spending on dating websites, which was apparently a cultural activity. And then there's another fascinating one where there was a trip to Amsterdam. And I said to myself, well, what's wrong with the Van Gogh Museum? And they said, no, it wasn't actually the Van Gogh Museum they visited in Amsterdam. And that became front page news a few weeks back. So a lot of wasteful spending in the UK. Second threat to freedom, high taxing governments. Now, one of the biggest threats in the UK is the fact that although we're winning the war on spending and the public now recognise a lot of wasteful spending in the UK, we're not winning the war on taxation on entrepreneurs and wealth creators. So, for example, there's a new 50p rate of income tax, which comes in at salaries over £150,000. And I was hoping that the Cameron government would get rid of that in their emergency budget, but unfortunately, because they're in coalition with a party called the Liberal Democrats, they haven't got rid of it because that was the part of the coalition agreement, which is very unfortunate because basically, as you might expect with the Laffer curve, this 50p income tax, according to government figures, is actually going to bring in £800 million less revenue than had they kept the top rate at 40% of tax. So that's shooting themselves in the foot, and it's going to cost 140,000 jobs in the UK when unemployment is rising. And on top of that, 25,000 entrepreneurs and wealth creators and job creators will probably leave the country. So a great threat to freedom is basically the tax on businessmen and entrepreneurs who create the jobs in the UK, and that's still a political battle we've got to win. The Conservative Party are good on that, issue, but unfortunately their Liberal Democrat coalition partners are not so good. The third threat to freedom, the trade unions in the UK. Union power in the UK is on the rise, and as we see spending cuts come about, with David Cameron cutting back on spending, the trade unions are gathering apace to try and resist these spending cuts. And one thing we've uncovered, again using the Freedom of Information Act, is the fact that the UK taxpayer is subsidising the unions to the tune of £85 million a year. So when you think about the political machines, the third forces in the UK, you have the Taxpayers Alliance, who we sort of scrape round on, I think we're about £1 million this year of money, raised from private individuals, I hasten to add, not the taxpayer. And the unions have £85 million from the government. And so they'll be fighting all the spending cuts that are going on, using taxpayers' money, ironically. So we've got a big threat there to our freedom in the UK. I'd say the fourth threat I'm going to talk about, just very briefly, is sort of the green issue and green mania, which of course I know is sweeping over here. We've heard a lot about cap and trade in the sessions here already at the conference. It's not my issue of expertise, I won't talk too much about it. But I do know that as a result of the environmental targets which the government has accepted in the UK, all the parties have accepted this, so all the parties have basically signed up to this agenda. As a result of that, energy bills are basically going to double over the next few years. Now, with families already being overstretched, with some of them losing their jobs with the recession and all this sort of thing, the idea that energy bills could double at the same time is just simply wrong. Then the fifth threat, in my view, in the UK, is the European Union. Now, I know in the US, you talk a lot about the UN and that sort of level of government, but in the UK, we've got the European Union to contend with as well. And I could go on about the EU for a long time. I wish that the UK had a position similar to Norway, sort of outside the European Union, but able to trade with our EU partners, but not being a member of this supranational bloc. But as a result of this, we're handing over a lot of money to the EU each year and get very little back. But also they're going to bring in new taxes because they want to expand the EU beyond spending 1% of EU GDP to expanding at least 2%. And to do that, they need to expand the tax base of the EU. And the way they're going to do that is to bring in, possibly, taxes on things like text messages, SMS messages, and flights, and this sort of thing. All these are in the pipeline at the moment. Am I over time, or a few more minutes? A couple more. Okay, very, very quickly then. The last two threats. Another campaign I set up last year is called Big Brother Watch, which looks at civil liberties and the issue of privacy. And one of the issues they've been campaigning on is Google and their Street View, which I know you have over here as well. Now, when the Street View cars went round the UK, taking all the pictures of all the houses and what have you, one of the things they did, as well as taking the photographs, they also were able to suck out the data from people's Wi-Fi connections. So, Google now has a lot of private information that people were putting over the internet using their Wi-Fi, credit card details or other important details to them, which are now on the Google databases. So we're now trying to fight that through Big Brother Watch. And the final thing I'll talk about is the electoral system in the UK. As well as doing Taxpayers Alliance and Big Brother Watch, my third great challenge for the coming year is to fight Britain's first referendum in 35 years. A referendum is like a proposition campaign that you have over here. And this referendum is going to be on Britain's electoral system. Because at the moment, like you, we have the first past the post electoral system, which is an eminently fair electoral system for a country to have. But as a result of this coalition we've got in the UK now between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, one of the requirements the Liberal Democrats had to become part of the coalition was to have a referendum on something called the alternative vote electoral system, which only Australia, Papua New Guinea and Fiji, I think, have. And it's such a complicated system that two of these countries have to have compulsory voting to make people vote. And on top of that, if you don't vote, you get fined $100. So this is a system they're talking about having in the UK. So I'll be heading up the No campaign against this, and the vote on that will be, let me think, on May the 5th next year. So hopefully we'll win that referendum and get rid of that particular threat to our freedom, because if we had that, we'd have perpetual coalition government in the UK, which I feel would be bad for us, because it would mean that good politicians like Margaret Thatcher wouldn't be able to implement the type of things that she did in Britain in the 1980s. So those are the 7 threats to freedom. Just a final thought, just one sentence on David Cameron. I think that he's really hit the ground running. He's had 100 days as Prime Minister now, just over 100 days. And certainly on the spending issue, he's been a lot better than I thought he would be. You know, big spending cuts going on in different departments, big ambitions for the spending cuts. You know, a lot of transparency coming in, which I know you have in the States. All receipts, well, I thought you did. All receipts over £500 going on the internet, all contracts over £25,000 going on the internet. So a lot of cause for hope. So not everything David Cameron does is bad. He's not been too good on the environment and things like that, but certainly on the spending side of things, there's a lot of hope to be had in the UK on that front. Thank you very much.